Just in time for the most comprehensive weekly look at the world of business and economics. Welcome, this is Business Redefined, and I am Julian Amboko. This week, KenGen. 35 billion shillings in market capitalization and 62% of Kenya's installed energy capacity, a company clearly at the heart of Kenya's energy generation. But with the COVID-19 pandemic having triggered a general slowdown in the business environment, KenGen's main source of revenue, which is energy sales, has come under pressure in the recent times. How has COVID-19 impacted the energy generation process in Kenya? How has its adverse effects altered KenGen's outlook? Are there projects whose implementation has been derailed by the pandemic? 8 months after sealing the drilling contract in Ethiopia, what steps have been made? Earlier today, I sat down with the company's Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director, Rebecca Miano, to discuss this and more. Take a listen. Rebecca Miano, thank you for your time and thank you just for hosting Business Redefined at your office. Let's start with the issue of COVID-19, which has thrown a wild card for many businesses. There is, of course, the concern around how this could potentially have impacted energy demand. What's your experience and how is this impacting KenGen?
Like you have rightly said, this pandemic has affected various sectors across the globe and even here in Kenya. And at KenGen and in Kenya, we have seen a reduced consumption of electricity and therefore reduced demand. But I'm glad to say that in the month of June, we have slowly seen the demand picking up again. And so we are hopeful that when things normalize, there will be sufficient demand to take up the generation that we have.
Let's talk about the sustainability of the power generation process. Of course, KenGen has many employees, and in this situation of physical distancing or social distancing, how does that work for you?
What we have done to ensure that there is sustainable power generation is to come up with a shift system across the areas. And we have sort of an extra team or a spare team so that in case we are impacted in our control rooms, this team can then come in and continue with generation. We have also implemented a rota system so that at every given time, we are sure that we have a team on duty, and that rota system has greatly helped to ensure there is continuous generation of power, especially because of the requirements of the Ministry of Health, of social distancing, decongesting workplaces. And we have also continually fumigated and sanitized the working areas, like washing our hands, and all the measures that have been put in place. And so we have gone an extra mile to be very vigilant, knowing that power generation is the engine and enabler of this economy. And also in the health sector, power generation is a critical service. That's why we have really taken keen interest and taken all the measures to ensure that that is not impacted.
And with regard to your pipeline of projects, many are just curious to know, is COVID-19 occasioning any delays, or are we still on course with what we had planned for 2020-21?
Due to the nature of our business, most of our projects are long-term, and they take a long time to implement. And so far, we haven't slowed down yet, but we are watching keenly to see how things will evolve. And so any new projects or any slowing down of implementation will greatly depend on the demand and how the economy picks up in future. But as of now, we continue with our project pipeline, knowing that it is really long-term.
And let's talk a little bit about some events we had in 2019, which are quite significant, the Ethiopian drilling contract, which KenGen secured. How is this unfolding 8 months down the line, especially in light of the situation?
We commenced the contract successfully last year, but earlier on in the year, around March, we were actually interrupted because of the pandemic, and we had to evacuate back our staff. So that slowed down the project, but I'm glad to say that we have now resumed. We have followed the guidelines that we were given by the Ministry of Health, both in Kenya and Ethiopia, plus civil aviation, and our teams are back, and the work will resume. And so I think we may be able to catch up and continue with that project to its conclusion. And we really do hope for the best, despite the pandemic.
Rebecca, one of the key pillars of your agenda has always been about diversification of the revenue base, and of course that Ethiopia was just one of them. Is there anything we're looking forward to in line with this diversification agenda, perhaps in the near term, medium term?
You're right. We have a diversification agenda, and this will generally be around our expertise. We have a lot of expertise in geothermal, consulting, and drilling, and we are looking at expanding in the region, in countries like Ethiopia, where we are already in. We have a presence there. We are discussing something with Djibouti, and we want to go to the region, and we are sure that the countries that have the geothermal resource will find it much easier to develop their capacity using the Kenyan expertise rather than going very far overseas to obtain that expertise. So that's what we are looking at. And all of them may not be very near term, but in the medium term and the long term, we may be able to actualize this diversification through offering the geothermal development expertise.
And still on last year, of course, KenGen did successfully retire its infrastructure bond towards the end of last year. And many investors out here are just curious to know, are we looking at another capital raise potentially coming from KenGen?
The public infrastructure bond offer was one of the most successful ones. And we are glad that we were able to retire it successfully. And we are forever grateful for the investors that had confidence in KenGen. Having retired that bond, we always look forward to more activities in the capital markets. But currently, if I look at our project pipeline, most of our projects are actually funded or just approaching financial close. So the project pipeline is fully funded. But going forward, our team is continuously reviewing, and if at the right time we require to go back to the capital markets, we will be ready to go back because we have always succeeded when we get there. And this was demonstrated when we had the rights issue in 2016, which then gave us more headroom to get more facilities through the capital markets. So I would say we are watching, and when we have a project that is ready to take up funds from the capital markets, we will be going back there in future.
Great. And Rebecca, I'm just curious to know, what's your outlook? Of course, 2020 is a very unpredictable year for many, and even by way of giving their assessment of how the near term will look like, it's really undefined. But what lies ahead for KenGen? Many are just curious to really understand what's your outlook like.
Like you have said, it is actually undefined. It's a year that has turned out to be much more different from what we projected and we had planned. We had planned many things, including our growth, but the pandemic has come in. But what I would like to tell you is that power generation is still relevant. There is still consumption of power. The demand, yes, will be reduced, but it is not rock bottom. So there will still be some business, but we are monitoring closely, and we haven't quite determined the actual effects. But probably in the coming months, we will be able to show, in accordance with our reporting requirements, what the full impact will have been.
Right, and that point takes us to a break. We have been focusing on KenGen and the impact that COVID-19 is having on the company and the energy generation process. When we come back, we'll be looking at how communities are being supported by this particular company. Stay tuned. Welcome back. This evening we're speaking to the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of KenGen, that's Kenya's electricity generator, I should say, that is Madam Rebecca Miano. Thank you once again for being with us. Let's now look at how KenGen is supporting communities in light of COVID-19. Just share with us some thoughts in terms of what you are doing.
We have partnered with communities, and we have been able to donate, for example, tanks, hand washing soap, masks, and even food. We have engaged them so that we partner together to be able to come through this crisis strong. because when the community succeeds, we also succeed. We have spent, let's say, around 33 million in total, both to the national kitty and in the communities. And even today, as we sit here, we have a team that is in Kisumu, the Sondu Miriu area, just discussing with the communities, engaging them, and providing those items to the communities. We have been to Naivasha, Embu, Lamu, the Tana River Basin, and we take joy in working together with our communities. And they've also been valuable in giving their suggestions, and they've been very supportive of our businesses. And
when you just look forward, because of course we've touched on the issue of the outlook that you have for the country, there is the hope that the reopening will see a resurgence in the business activity. Just how optimistic are you in terms of the outlook when you're going forward, really in the near term here?
We are optimistic. We saw a really suppressed demand in the months of April. Then May was a bit modest, but we have seen an upward trend in the months of June. So everything remaining constant and being optimistic that this pandemic will be contained, we believe that in the next couple of months, we may be able to go back to the demand that we had seen in the months of February, that is just before the COVID-19. So I'm generally quite optimistic that the economy will pick up and various sectors will be able to open up again and therefore have a good uptick on the power generation, thereby increasing the demand and improving our sales.
Rebecca, let's talk about Kenya's renewable energy space, and especially with a focus on the UN Global Compact where you participated in. How does that agenda, by and large, now fit within the Kenyan landscape where, of course, Kenya has made significant steps in terms of the renewable energy share of the total energy mix?
On June 15th and 16th, the UN Global Compact had the Leaders Summit that was very successful, and I was among the speakers. And I was honored to speak about renewable energy, not only in KenGen and in Kenya, but in Africa. And it's very good news that Kenya has one of the highest percentages in terms of renewable energy. And currently, over 85% of the energy consumed in this country is renewable. So that is very good news. But also looking at our project pipeline here in KenGen going forward, all our projects are then based on renewable energy. That is geothermal, wind, and solar. And if you look at Africa, Africa is a renewable energy continent, very well endowed, more than any other continent. And then the advantages of renewable energy are very clear. It is cheaper. It then supports health, because of the pollution and the reduced carbon emissions. So it supports the health of the continent and the health of the country. And then, of course, it is quicker to implement. It offers jobs. And it's such a pleasure to see that it's easily accessible. And you therefore see even women in the villages and women in the continent easing their daily work because of the access to electricity. It also supports education. You find children are able to do their work even at home, and even the sheer connectivity of the internet. So it supports the telecommunication, it supports every facet of the economy. It's really an enabler and a big-time enabler of the success of the health sector. Because if you look at all the equipment in the hospitals, they are really powered by electricity. And renewable energy is very sustainable. If you look at geothermal, it's not dependent on weather, it's not dependent on any other thing. It is a freely available resource that is more sustainable. And so the story of renewable energy is very close to my heart. And I really hope that in the near future, this continent and even this country will reach the levels of connectivity and access to electricity that will be nearly 100%. And Kenya has an advantage. One of the highest access to electricity in Africa is found in Kenya, about 75%, while the continent average is about 40%. And despite the COVID-19 crisis, the government has the vision of attaining 100% access by 2022. That may be impacted a bit or slowed down a bit, but the vision is still there of having 100% access to electricity.
And speaking about renewable energy, when we were together last year focusing on a few issues around the geothermal space, Kenya had made significant strides in terms of where it sits in the global landscape. How is it thus far, or have we just maintained that position?
Since then, we commissioned Olkaria 5, and that then placed Kenya at number 7. When we spoke last, we were at number 8. So we are making stride. And in 2021, sometime in 2021, we'll be commissioning Olkaria 1 Unit 6, which then will also improve our global standing. So that is a very good achievement for this country in terms of geothermal development. And
just now to wrap it up really, in terms of your energy mix, we have progressively seen more focus on geothermal and less on the hydro. How is this faring on? We've had some very heavy rains this year. How is it looking like?
We have had one of the highest water levels in history this year. And the importance of hydro, one, is that it is cheaper, it is sustainable, and we use the hydros to really stabilize the grid. When you have other sources of energy like wind and solar that are intermittent, hydro is very reliable. What we are doing is to then conserve the water and preserve it for periods that are then dry, so that we are able to have hydro generation throughout the year. Hydro is still a big portion, actually bigger than geothermal currently, because we have over 818 megawatts, and it's about 40% of our generation, which is very close to what we have in geothermal. It's only that probably this country has almost exhausted its hydro capacity, whereas geothermal is still a lot of potential. So we don't have many more hydro projects like we have the geothermal. But yes, when we have enough rain, it's very good that we can conserve water. And the dams also help to reduce the flooding downstream by holding much more water that could then have just flown to the Tana River and the Tana Basin.
Of course, the spa is quite an asset for KenGen, and many would just want to know how it's faring at this particular point.
The geothermal spa, of course, is one of a kind in Africa, said to be therapeutic. And over the last year and over the last months, we had seen a lot of uptake in the geothermal spa. In fact, the weekend looked like it was a preferred destination for many Kenyans. But because of the COVID-19, we then discontinued, and we actually closed the spa because of the health issues. We took an opportunity to improve the facility and do repairs, but when things start moving up again, we will open the spa then, and people will be able to enjoy the uptick again of that special facility down there.
And we have been speaking to the KenGen Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, that is Rebecca Miano, on the subject of KenGen and how it is impacted by COVID-19, the entire energy generation process, as well as the sustainability going forward. Up next is the Markets Review.
Markets Review, proudly brought to you by Business Daily. More possibilities.
Let's take a look at how the capital and forex markets close the day today. And we start off with the stock market, where we're seeing the NSE 20 share index close at 1942.12. Change year to date is down 26.8 points, and change day on day, that's compared to yesterday, is down by a marginal 0.5%. So therefore, very minimal change compared to the trading day yesterday. But crossing over onto the forex market, which has been relatively quiet over the past couple of weeks, the Kenya shilling to the US dollar closed at 106.52 points, down marginally by some 0.6%. 0.06%. Against the sterling pound, it's at 131.17. That's up slightly by 0.48%. And against the euro at 120.14, down slightly by 0.59%. Therefore, as I said, it's been a relatively quiet period in the forex market, particularly because of the interventions which particularly are being made regarding the instability and uncertainty in the global market. So we'll continue monitoring both the capital and forex markets to see how this progresses in the months ahead. Right, and we've been speaking to the Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of KenGen, that's Madam Rebecca Miano. Of course, some quick highlights that have been pointed out in terms of what's happening. There was a sluggish, there was a bit of a contraction in terms of consumption of electricity between the months of March and April. Therefore, that has had a slight impact. But the CEO does say that there's been a pickup compared to what has been seen before, and therefore there's hope for recovery. Also indicating that the projects continue as scheduled. They have rolled out Olkaria 5, which is continuing to add on to the energy generation in the country, and placing now Kenya at the 7th largest installed geothermal capacity. Remember when we were covering the KenGen Energy Edition last year, we were at position 8, and also highlighting the interventions which the company is taking, plowing in about 33 million shillings both to the COVID-19 emergency fund as well as to communities directly. Therefore, this is something which we'll continue to follow up. Incidentally, today was the final day in terms of the company's financial year, which ends on June 30th. So we shall be looking forward to their results and digging into those numbers to see how the company has been impacted in light of the prevailing environment. That takes us to the close of Business Redefined. Many thanks for tuning in. Many thanks for the feedback online. We shall continue with this conversation on energy generation and the COVID-19 pandemic in bulletins, in stories we'll be covering. Much delight for having you, and stay tuned to NTV for more programming.